Hello everyone, and welcome back to the channel. Imagine a world where the clothes you wear, the food you eat, and even the ideas you believe in have traveled thousands of miles across deserts and mountains just to reach you. For centuries, there was an invisible thread that connected the glittering palaces of ancient China to the marble forums of Rome. It was not a single path, but a sprawling web of trails, and its name, the Silk Road, conjures images of camel caravans, exotic spices, and intrepid explorers. But the real story is much richer. It is a story about humanity's unstoppable urge to connect, to exchange, and to discover what lies beyond the horizon. Today, we are going on a journey. We will trace the footsteps of monks, merchants, warriors, and pilgrims. We will uncover how a tiny insect's thread changed the fate of empires, how a piece of paper revolutionized human thought, and how the echoes of this ancient network still resonate in your daily life. This is the complete story of the Silk Road and the cultural exchange that shaped our world. Subtle desert winds swept across the vast expanse of Central Asia more than 2,000 years ago, carrying with them the scent of opportunity and the dust of unknown lands. No one woke up one morning and decided to build the Silk Road. It was never a single, paved road with signposts and milestones. Instead, it grew organically, like a winding river finding its many channels across the earth. It became a sprawling, ever-shifting network of caravan tracks stretching from the ancient Chinese capitals to the Mediterranean Sea. The story really begins not with silk, but with horses. The Han Dynasty of China, a powerful empire around 100 years before Christ, faced a constant threat from nomadic tribes to their north. They needed horses, strong, powerful horses that could carry armored soldiers and outrun the tough steppe ponies of their enemies. Their own horses were too small. Rumors reached the imperial court of heavenly horses far to the west, in a land called Fergana, horses that sweated blood and could gallop for days. The emperor, a man of immense ambition named Wu, sent an envoy named Zhang Qian on a diplomatic mission to find allies and, crucially, to find these magnificent animals. Zhang Qian's journey was an epic in itself. He was captured by the very nomads he was trying to bypass, held for a decade, escaping, wandering through deserts and over the Pamir Mountains, the roof of the world. He never found his military alliance, but he returned to the Chinese court with something perhaps even more valuable. He carried stories. He spoke of sophisticated urban civilizations in Bactria and Persia, of fermented grape drinks, of strange beasts, and of advanced cultures that were the equals of China. He told them that other empires valued a particular, shimmering Chinese fabric above all else. This was the spark. The Chinese realized that the strong horses they desired could be traded for the exquisite silk they produced, a secret they had guarded for centuries. A bolt of silk, so light a single man could carry a fortune on his back, was worth more than gold in the markets of Persia and Rome. And so, with no grand opening ceremony, the first thread was spun. Caravans began to move, not for exploration or conquest in the traditional sense, but for trade. A superhighway of exchange was born from a simple equation, one empire's military necessity for another empire's luxurious secret. The world, without quite realizing it, had just become a much smaller place. Imagine for a moment a fabric so light, so smooth, and so iridescent that it felt like touching liquid moonlight. To the ancient Romans, this was not poetic exaggeration but a startling reality when they first encountered silk. The fabric became the centerpiece of a story that connected a vast hemisphere, and its journey explains exactly why the Silk Road got its evocative name. The tale of silk is one of meticulous secrecy, staggering value, and a level of desire that reshaped the economies of ancient empires. The process began, always, with a small, unassuming white caterpillar. The Bombyx mori silkworm, for thousands of years, performed its magic exclusively for China. The entire life cycle was a closely guarded state secret. Legend says a Chinese empress discovered the process when a cocoon fell into her tea and unraveled into a shimmering thread. For more than 2,000 years, the method of raising the worms on a strict diet of mulberry leaves, harvesting the cocoons, and carefully unwinding the single filament, sometimes a kilometer long from just one pod, was a mystery to the rest of the world. Revealing this knowledge was a crime punishable by death. As this thread was woven into cloth in imperial workshops, its value was already immense, but the moment it left Chinese borders, its price skyrocketed. No single merchant traveled the entire length of the Silk Road. Instead, it was a relay race of commerce. A Chinese trader would sell to a Central Asian middleman at an oasis town. That middleman would transport it across a grueling desert, through a pass in the mountains, and sell it to a Persian merchant at a caravanserai. The Persian would then take it to the border of the Roman Empire. Each handoff multiplied the price. By the time a roll of silk reached a Roman matron in Alexandria or the emperor in Rome, it was literally worth its weight in gold. The Roman elite craved it with an almost irrational fever. Senators and nobles draped themselves in the sheer, almost transparent fabric, scandalizing conservative historians. So much gold and silver flowed eastward from Roman coffers to pay for this luxury that the Roman Senate repeatedly tried to ban the wearing of silk, arguing it was financially and morally bankrupting the empire. These laws were utterly ignored. The desire for this shimmering fabric was too powerful. Silk was not just a commodity. It was a status symbol, a source of beauty, and the central artery of a trade system that pumped ideas, technologies, and dreams across a continent. The humble silkworm, in its own quiet way, was driving world history. While bolts of silk and sacks of aromatic spices formed the physical weight of a camel's load, a far more profound cargo traveled alongside them, invisible and completely weightless. The Silk Road was the world's first great information superhighway. Ideas, philosophies, and scientific principles flowed along the caravan routes with as much vitality as any commercial good, fundamentally reshaping the civilizations they touched. It is a common mistake to view this ancient network purely through the lens of economics, because its most enduring legacy is an intellectual and spiritual one. Buddhism's journey from its birthplace in northern India into the heart of Central Asia and China is the most powerful example. In the centuries following Alexander the Great's campaigns, which had opened Greek colonial cities in Bactria and Gandhara, a profound fusion occurred. Buddhist missionaries, their saffron robes a stark contrast to the desert sands, walked these trade routes. They did not travel alone. They hitched their spiritual journeys to the slow rhythm of merchant caravans, finding protection in numbers and a receptive audience in the cosmopolitan oasis towns. A merchant from Samarkand, already open to gods from many lands, might listen to a monk's sermon in a caravanserai and carry those ideas to the next stop, repeating and transforming the teachings in the process. The physical proof of this exchange is stunning. For the first time, the Buddha began to be depicted in human form, a practice directly influenced by the Greek artistic tradition Apollonius and his followers had spread a few centuries earlier. The flowing, realistic robes, the perfectly sculpted faces, and the heroic postures of the earliest Buddha statues are a direct descendant of the Greek god Apollo. This mixed Greco-Buddhist art was then carried by pilgrims and artists along the mountain passes into the Tarim Basin, where it exploded into a magnificent culture of cave monasteries. At places like the Mogeo Caves near Dunhuang, 1,000 years of murals show the evolution of this idea, from a philosophy to a fully fledged religion with icons, all because of the open road. But it was not just Buddhism. Nestorian Christianity spread eastward, establishing communities in Tang Dynasty China. Manichaeism, a blend of Christian, Zoroastrian, and Buddhist ideas from Persia, became a world religion for a time. The tools of thought traveled too. Mathematical concepts from India, including the crucial numeral zero, were picked up by Arab scholars and would eventually revolutionize Western mathematics. The Silk Road was a conduit of consciousness. More than any single product, it carried the raw materials of how to view the world, question it, and seek meaning within it. Picture the scene. You are a traveler in the year 700 of the Common Era, part of a large caravan that has been shuffling through a sea of sand dunes for 2 punishing weeks. The sun is a relentless, hammering presence, and your water skin is dangerously light. Dust clogs every pore. Then, just as the light begins to soften into the orange glow of late afternoon, a silhouette appears on the horizon. It is a massive, fortress-like structure, a caravanserai. This was not an inn in the way we understand a hotel today. It was a sanctuary, a microcosmic city of global exchange, and the essential node that made the entire Silk Road system physically possible. A caravanserai was designed with a singular, practical purpose in mind: security and survival. It was typically a large, square building with high, windowless exterior walls made of mud brick or stone. There was a single, monumental gate, massive enough to admit a loaded camel and strong enough to be barred against the dangers of the night. Inside, the architecture opened into a vast central courtyard. Around this open space, a series of arched niches and small rooms provided basic shelter. The soundscape was a chaotic orchestra. Camels bellowed and groaned as their heavy packs were removed. Merchants shouted in a dizzying mix of Sogdian, Persian, Chinese, and Tibetan. Blacksmiths hammered new shoes onto tired donkeys, and the air was thick with the smells of wood smoke, roasting mutton, exotic spices, and animal dung. The caravanserai was the world's great informal university and marketplace of culture. After a meal of flatbread and a greasy stew, travelers from the opposite ends of the earth would sit around a flickering oil lamp. Here, a Buddhist pilgrim from Korea, heading toward the holy sites of India, would explain his doctrine to a skeptical Zoroastrian merchant from Persia. A Chinese official would unfurl a map and point out the political dangers ahead. In the shadows, a musician might pull out a lute, the ancestor of the guitar, which had recently arrived from Central Asia, and fill the night with a melancholy melody. Stories of monstrous deserts, bandit attacks, and the customs of strange kingdoms were the evening's entertainment and vital intelligence. These were also places of deep piety and superstition. In one corner, a traveler would kneel facing Mecca. In another, a Buddhist painted a small devotional image on the wall. The caravanserai was a leveler of humanity. King's envoys slept on the same packed earth floor as humble peddlers. After the isolation of the desert, it was a reconnection with the world. For one night, the loneliness of the vast, indifferent spaces was pushed back by the warmth of a communal fire, and by morning, new friendships, partnerships, and understandings have been forged, ready to be carried on to the next stretch of the road. When we imagine the Silk Road, we often picture lines of anonymous, hardy camels and faceless traders. But the road was a stage for a cast of far more diverse and fascinating characters. It was populated not just by merchants, but by diplomats carrying gifts and veiled threats, by warriors carving out empires, by holy men seeking wisdom, and by artists spreading new visions of beauty. The human element is what turned a geographical corridor into a living, breathing phenomenon, and understanding these people is the key to truly grasping the road's magic. The undisputed masters of the caravan trade were the Sogdians. Their homeland was around Samarkand and Bokhara, a region of fertile river valleys in modern-day Uzbekistan. They did not build a vast, conquering empire of their own, but they built a commercial empire that stretched from the Byzantine border to the heart of China. From a young age, a Sogdian boy was trained in the art of commerce. Legend says a newborn's tongue was smeared with sugar for sweet speech and his palms with glue to hold on to money. Their language became the common tongue of trade, and their communities, dotted in merchant colonies even within Chinese cities like Chang'an, were the hubs of the network. They were the translators, the bankers who pioneered systems of credit, and the fixers who could make a deal between a silk farmer and a king. Then there were the religious pilgrims, often traveling the opposite way. The most famous is the Chinese Buddhist monk Xuanzang, who in the 7th century made an illegal, secret 17-year journey to India. He was not seeking profit but sacred texts. His epic journey, recorded in his book Record of the Western Regions, became not only a foundational Buddhist text but a priceless historical and geographical document. He describes the colossal Buddha statues carved into a cliff face in Bamiyan, the glittering markets, and the ruthless bandits. People like Xuanzang braved the Gobi Desert and the highest mountain passes on earth, driven by a conviction that truth lay over the horizon. Their internal spiritual compass was just as vital as any map. Diplomatic missions were another dramatic spectacle. Envoys from powerful empires traveled with immense caravans full of royal gifts, exotic animals like ostriches and lions, and elegant manufactured goods. Their job was to perform power. When a Byzantine envoy arrived at the court of the Turkic Khagan on the steppe, the exchange of luxurious silk robes and jeweled swords was a ritualized dance of status and alliance. Each person on the Silk Road, whether a princess sent as a bride to a distant Khan, a Nestorian monk fleeing persecution, or a mercenary soldier selling his sword, was a living vessel of cultural memory, carrying a piece of their home into a foreign land, transforming both themselves and the world around them. The Silk Road was a bringer of wealth, wisdom, and artistic wonder, but it had a dark side, a terrifying shadow that rode alongside the packs of silk and spice. The very networks that facilitated the blossoming of global civilization also functioned as a perfectly engineered conduit for death. The story of the ancient world's pandemic proves, with chilling clarity, that the road did not just connect trade, it connected biology in a way that could, and did, collapse empires. The most devastating example is the plague of Justinian and, later, the Black Death, both caused by the bacterium Yersinia pestis. The engine of this microbial travel was not the camel directly, but the nomadic rodent populations of the Central Asian steppe, specifically marmots and gerbils, and their fleas. Fleas carrying the plague bacterium lived in these rodent colonies for centuries in a state of enzootic stability. The disruption came with human movement. As global trade intensified and climate shifts occurred, infected fleas and their rodent hosts began to hitch rides in grain sacks, bales of wool, and the personal luggage of merchants. A caravan moving from a plague-stricken rodent colony in the Tian Shan Mountains towards a trading post on the Silk Road was now an unwitting biological weapon. The mechanisms of trade turned into accelerants of disease. A grain caravan from Alexandria might stop at a caravanserai where the plague was present among the local rodents. The ship's rats, and their cargo of infected fleas, would swap genetic material and then board a vessel bound for Constantinople, the beating heart of the Roman Empire. In a bustling, populous city with a global grain supply, the pathogen exploded. The plague of Justinian in the 6th century killed tens of millions, cratering the population of the Mediterranean world and permanently weakening the Byzantine Empire just as it was trying to reunite the old Roman territories. The same tragic script was replayed on an even more apocalyptic scale 800 years later with the Black Death. The Mongol Empire, the largest contiguous land empire in history, had unified the entire length of the Silk Road under a single administration in the 13th century, the so-called Pax Mongolica. Trade and travel reached an unprecedented peak of speed and safety. But this golden age of connectivity was also a super-spreader era. The plague raced along these now hyper-efficient routes, from the remote steppe to the Italian trading city of Kaffa, and from there, by merchant ship, to the ports of Europe. The Silk Road was a neutral network. It transported the light of a Buddhist sutra and the terror of a flea-borne bacterium with the same impersonal, logistical efficiency. For more than a millennium, the Silk Road was a fragmented relay race. Goods and ideas passed through a kaleidoscope of quarreling kingdoms, rival empires, and dangerous no-man's lands. Then, in the 13th century, the entire dynamic was shattered and reforged by a force so brutal and so effective that it still defies imagination. The Mongol conquests, a storm of horse archers that swept out of the northern steppe, created the largest contiguous land empire in the history of the world. For a long time, the Mongols were remembered only for destruction, but their legacy on the Silk Road was a century of unprecedented peace and a truly global awakening. Genghis Khan and his successors did not set out to be cultural patrons. Their genius was military organization and a terrifyingly pragmatic approach to power. They conquered by the sword, destroying cities that resisted like Samarkand and Baghdad in cataclysmic sackings. But once the conquest was done, their priorities shifted with remarkable speed from plunder to taxation. Alive, productive, and trading farmer or merchant was far more valuable than a dead one. The Mongols realized that their vast, stretched empire, from Korea to Hungary, needed to be knitted together by a flow of commerce. To achieve this, they established the Pax Mongolica, the Mongol peace. For the first and only time in history, a single political authority controlled the entire length of the old Silk Road. This had a revolutionary effect. The Mongols eliminated the patchwork of local bandits and petty kings who had previously extracted endless tolls and made travel a gamble. The roads were now safe. A traveler, it was boasted, could walk from the edge of China to the border of Persia with a gold plate on his head and not be molested. This was an exaggeration, but it held a core of truth. The Mongols built a sophisticated relay system of postal stations, or yam, with fresh horses and supplies for authorized envoys. They standardized trade regulations and actively encouraged merchants, often partnering with Central Asian Muslim traders who became their financial administrators. The result was an explosion of connectivity that makes the Silk Road an early precursor to modern globalization. It was in this century that Marco Polo, the Venetian merchant, made his famous journey to the court of Kublai Khan. He was not unique. Thousands of Europeans, Persians, and Chinese were on the move. The exchange was not just of silk, but of raw materials for art, like the cobalt blue that traveled from Persia to decorate Chinese porcelain. Cartographers and astronomers in Persia and China compared notes. The world, for a brief, brilliant moment, was an integrated system. The Mongol Empire, born of incredible violence, had inadvertently created the conditions for the medieval world's greatest period of cultural and scientific cross-pollination. The legacy of the Silk Road is often taught through artifacts we can see, the statues, the murals, the fragile silks in museums. But a huge portion of the cultural exchange was for our senses of hearing and taste, a symphony of sounds and flavors that permanently altered the identity of entire civilizations. The music we hear and the food we eat today are, in many ways, a direct inheritance from the caravanserais and trade routes of Central Asia. Consider the musical instruments that form the backbone of an orchestra. The lute, the gentle, pear-shaped stringed instrument that became the central solo voice of the European Renaissance, did not originate in Europe. Its ancestors, the oud and the pipa, traveled along the Silk Road. The pipa, a four-stringed lute, came to China from Central Asia, brought by Sogdian and Persian musicians, and became one of the most elegant and expressive instruments of the Tang dynasty court. The spike fiddle, the ancestor of the violin, also made this long journey east. But the exchange went both ways. Chinese tuning systems and bamboo mouth organs were noted by travelers and spread west. The soundscape of Tang Dynasty Chang'an, the largest, most cosmopolitan city in the world at the time, was a stunning fusion. A popular craze swept the capital for Western music, for orchestras from Kutcha and Turfan that played lively, dancing rhythms so different from the stately, classical Chinese ceremonial music. The story of food is even more visceral. Imagine Indian food without the chili pepper. Imagine Italian food without the tomato. Imagine Swiss chocolate without the sugar. All of these foundational ingredients came from other worlds via trade networks. But the Silk Road's edible legacy was especially powerful before the Columbian Exchange. The road was a pipeline for the spices that drove the European age of exploration: cinnamon, ginger, and black pepper from the tropical East. But it also moved the fundamentals. Hard wheat, the kind that makes bread rise with a fine crumb, made its way from the Fertile Crescent into China, where it transformed from a novelty into a staple, leading to the invention of the steamed bun and the noodle. Grapes and the art of winemaking, which Zhang Qian had first observed with such wonder, were imported and thrived. In the other direction, peaches and apricots, the golden fruits of China, traveled to Persia and then to the Roman world, where they were named Persian apples and soon filled Mediterranean orchards. The world's palate was forever enriched because a merchant, somewhere in a dusty caravanserai, once broke bread with a stranger and traded a cutting, a seed, or a recipe. In the vast catalogue of Silk Road exchanges, one unassuming product stands out as perhaps the single most transformative technology in human history. It was not a glittering gem or a precious metal. It was paper. The story of paper's journey from its birthplace in China, through the Islamic world, and into Europe is a stunning demonstration of how the trade routes fundamentally altered how humans record, store, and disseminate knowledge, triggering revolutions in thought that continue to shape our world. The invention of paper is traditionally dated to the Han Dynasty in China around 105 years of the Common Era, when a court eunuch named Cai Luan refined the process using mulberry bark, rags, and fishing nets. For centuries, this remained a Chinese craft secret, moving along the trade routes not as a technology but as a finished luxury product. Buddhist monks, who had a deep need for writing scriptures, were early adopters. The material was lighter than wood or bamboo strips and infinitely cheaper than silk, the traditional writing surface. The sacred texts of Buddhism, copied onto durable paper, were packed into the saddlebags of pilgrims and monks and carried across the deserts to Korea and Japan, seeding literacy and religious practice. The great secret of how to make paper itself did not move through a peaceful commercial transaction. It was captured in a burst of violence. In the mid-8th century, Arab armies of the Abbasid Caliphate clashed with Tang Chinese forces at the Battle of Talas, in modern-day Kyrgyzstan. The Arabs were victorious, and among the Chinese prisoners of war were skilled papermakers. They were taken to Samarkand, which was already a global entrepot. There, the captives were put to work, building the first paper mill outside of China. The knowledge was no longer a secret. The Islamic world understood the potential immediately. Samarkand paper became famous for its quality, and from there, the technology leaped to Baghdad, the glittering center of the Abbasid Golden Age. The impact was a thunderclap of intellectual acceleration. Baghdad saw the establishment of a paper mill and a thriving book industry. Libraries swelled. The great house of wisdom became a translation factory, turning Greek philosophy and Persian astronomy into Arabic, all because the material was now readily available. The cheap, durable medium democratized learning in a way parchment, made from precious animal skins, never could. The technology then trickled into Europe through Islamic Spain, where paper mills in Valencia fed the hungry minds of the newly forming universities. Without paper, the Gutenberg printing press would have been a useless invention, a machine with no affordable medium to print on. The words of Aristotle, the formulas of algebra, and the anatomy of the human eye all moved west on a substance born in a Chinese workshop and freed by a Central Asian battle, proof that the deadliest conflict can sometimes unleash the greatest gift of knowledge. The Silk Road, as a living, thriving artery of camel caravans and oasis kingdoms, eventually faded into the dust of history. The sea routes discovered by European explorers gradually drew the heavy cargo of global trade away from the arduous, dangerous interior of Asia. The vibrant Buddhist monasteries of the Taklamakan were abandoned to the sand, and the great cities of the Sogdians crumbled into tells, artificial hills of forgotten civilizations. But the story of the Silk Road does not end with its physical decline. Its legacy is not a relic in a museum but a permanent, invisible architecture of our modern world, a foundational layer of global connection that we have never truly left behind. The most direct legacy is biological. The world we live in is a biological mix created by this ancient network. The foods that define our national cuisines are almost all immigrants. The orange is a migrant, the walnut is a migrant, the rhubarb is a migrant. They have become so naturalized to their adopted homes that we forget they were once exotic novelties brought over mountain passes. The very genetic makeup of the populations along the old routes tells a story of profound mixing. The DNA of a modern Uzbek, or a modern Han Chinese from the ancient capital of Chang'an, often contains traces of the peoples who met, traded, and married along the Silk Road, the Persian merchants, the Turkic soldiers, the Arab scholars. The road lives on in our blood. Culturally, the Silk Road programmed us for globalization. The concept that ideas, fashion, art, and music can and should travel across political borders, that there is value in the foreign, was normalized over thousands of years of this exchange. The cosmopolitan bustle of a Tang Chinese capital, where Turkish fashions were the height of chic and Indian astronomy was a science, mirrors our own global cities like New York or Singapore. The Silk Road is the original model for our interconnected existence. It also left behind a warning. The same network that spread beauty and wisdom also transmitted plague and war. It proved that no wall is high enough, no distance wide enough, to seal a civilization off from the rest of humanity. We are, and have always been, in this together. The empty caravanserais and the buried cities stand as a monument not just to what we traded, but to the essential truth that the most powerful human impulse is not to isolate, but to connect, to walk over the next dune and find out who is on the other side. And so, our caravan reaches the end of its long journey. As we have seen, the Silk Road was never just about silk. It was a corridor of consciousness, a web of biological, intellectual, and artistic exchange that stretched across the spine of the world. From the accidental mission of a Chinese diplomat searching for horses, to the devastating journeys of invisible plague bacteria, to the quiet, transformative power of a sheet of paper, this network gave us a shared inheritance. The next time you bite into a peach, listen to a lute, or write on a piece of paper, remember the dusty, dangerous, and magnificent roads that brought these things to you. The caravans have vanished, and the great cities are buried in sand, but the legacy of connection they forged is more relevant than ever. We are still living on the Silk Road. If you enjoyed this deep dive into history, please leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments below. What historical journey would you like us to take next? Subscribe and ring the bell so you do not miss it. Until next time, keep exploring.